This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 370, A Smaller Core. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Today we're talking about a smaller core with Theodore Biadala. Theodore has been contributing to Drupal for 13 years, 10 of which he has been the JavaScript core maintainer. And for a bit more than a year, he's been a provisional core JavaScript package maintainer alongside Sally Young. He's currently working at Acquia in the Drupal acceleration team and supporting efforts to get Drupal 10 released on schedule. Welcome to the show, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I'm Nick Laughlin, founder at Enlightened Development, and today my co-hosts are, as usual, John Picozzi, solutions architect at EPAM. Welcome to the show.
Hey, everyone. And I actually just realized this show's called A Smaller Core, but has nothing to do with working out. So don't worry, we're going to talk about Drupal.
Also joining us for the third week as guest host is Taryn Almendarez, developer, advocate at Pantheon, and lead of the Drupal Diversity and Inclusion Initiative. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me back.
You have a new module of the week. John, this I think came from you.
Yeah, so I don't know if anybody's ever used Swagger UI as a way of showing API documentation, but recently I had a request to use this in a project that we were building, and I actually added there's a module for that, right? So the Open API UI Swagger module actually allows for you to be able to use the Swagger library with Open API UI to be able to show your API documentation within Drupal. The reason I bring this up is because it was super easy to set up and install, and provides really great documentation using the Swagger library for your API. So there are a couple of module requirements plus the Swagger library as a requirement. So there are some things to install in addition to this module because it uses the Open API UI modules or set of modules as a kind of underlayment. But really quick and easy way to get pretty good API documentation up and running for your Drupal site. So I recommend checking it out if you have that requirement, or if you're using an API with your Drupal site and you need to provide some documentation to people.
And does it integrate with things like JSON API and like automatically document that, or?
Yeah. Like, so we're using JSON API, and literally I installed the Open API UI module and one, I think, dependent module, and then this module, and then installed the Swagger library, and like, boom, my whole all my documentation was right there. I was like, oh, this is pretty spiffy.
Awesome.
Very spiffy.
Very cool. Okay, let's move on to our primary topic this week. Let's start with an easy question. Can you tell us when we say smaller core, aside from John's joke in the intro, can you tell us what we mean by smaller core?
So it's all about making Drupal maintainable in the long term. So right now Drupal is like pretty big, so it needs a lot of work to be able to maintain it, release it, and just keep it up to date with dependencies. So the idea is to make Drupal easier to maintain, so we can focus more on the important parts of Drupal core. Like Drupal is Drupal core and the Contrib ecosystem. Mm-hmm. So that's, the coverage for the features is going to stay the same with core and Contrib. It's just the features within core. We want to make them more focused on what Drupal core is supposed to be addressing as problems. And that way we can make sure that we solve those problems really well and leave the rest to Contrib. So yeah,
So-
it's essentially providing a very solid basis to build on.
Okay.
So like that makes a ton of sense to me. And I'm well, I don't know if I would say a big supporter of this, but like I think it makes a lot of sense. And like making core smaller and more portable and compact is something I definitely agree with, right? So part of this, right, is obviously taking certain modules and moving them to the contrib space, and we're going to talk plenty about that. But I'm wondering if you can tell us, like, what modules have already been kind of removed or from core, like, kind of not really through this process, but like in the past have been like kind of, hey, you've seen like, oh well, we're going to put this in contrib because it doesn't really make sense to be in core.
Right. So I wasn't really involved in the previous effort, so I've only looked at what's been happening for the past year or so. So during the last, and actually I don't think we have many modules removed, like in Drupal 6 or 7 or that kind of things.
Yeah.
But what's been removed from 9 to 10? So we have the aggregator module, the CKEditor 4 module, well, the CKEditor module, which ships with CKEditor 4, library, the color module, HAL, QuickEdit, RDF. RDF was like pretty pretty nasty to get rid of, but it happened. And as far as themes goes, we have Bartik, Classy, Stable, and 7 out of core
Now,
for Drupal 10.
Wow.
In the past, or is this on the table? That this is going to be like a clear and blatant expression of my lack of knowledge right here. But like the forum module still in core, or is that maybe
It is still in core.
on the docket to be talked about as to whether it should or shouldn't be?
Well, it's still in core, but it's pretty much going to be moved out of core at some point. So I don't have the proper timetable, but we started with the easy module, I guess. Well, RDF and aggregator were not easy, but they were, really hard to maintain. So, we made the effort to get them out of core to make the life of core committers easier.
Okay.
But color and HAL, they're pretty easy to get rid of.
I can't even tell you how happy I am that color is out of core, because I'm I'm pretty sure every Drupal site I've ever built, I've shut that module off on. So
yeah, it's because it's a nice feature, but it's not really a core thing to have.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we started with some easy modules to kind of make sure that the process works properly. That finding. I mean, we're probably going to talk a bit more about the process, but making sure that everything runs smoothly before we can, say, okay, we want those 5 more modules to get out of core and into contrib. So we are trialing the process and starting to work pretty well. And now we're going to kind of move on and go down the list, I guess.
Well, speaking of process, actually, before we move on, I think it's important to also highlight that it's not just a matter of moving something to contrib and that's the end of the day. Like, there are other things to consider. So, for example, you mentioned CKEditor 4 was one of the ones being moved out, and which means CKEditor is moving in. And I remember seeing an issue in the Drupal infrastructure channel in Slack maybe 2 weeks ago where that process with the composer dependencies is people are ending up with 2 CKEditors in their project, one in the contrib folder and one in the core folder, because we have something with the same dependency name, but it's moved where it lives. And so there's some, these types of things, if it's your own project and your own thing, sometimes it's easy to move things around. But when you have a lot of complex dependency chains, sometimes just moving something isn't as simple as like, okay, well, we're going to move it over here and say that it's done. Composer might have other ideas about that. And then, and Drupal doesn't like having libraries in more than one location because, it wreaks havoc. But those are the types of problems that the core team is looking to solve with this process, it sounds like.
Yeah, that's so I've been out for 3 weeks, so I'm not sure exactly what's the status on that, but I think they had started on a solution for this. But yeah, so this is part of the process that we need to iron out before we, move more modules out of core to make sure
Yep.
that this works properly, so we don't trip up people, basically.
All right, Theo. So I know that we're talking about this process in general, but what is the exact process for selecting what gets removed from core, what stays in? Like, how does that work out? Is there like a council of like core removers?
It's not council of core removers. So the decision end up on the product owners. So we have 4 of them today. There's Dries, Webchick, Gabor, and Roy. That our product owner decides kind of what should Drupal core be, I guess. But it gets input from the whole core committer team as well as contributors. Because if contributors really want, well, I guess even if they really want, but the product owner don't, I mean, product owner have the last say in this. So yeah, they're the one that decide. And if we don't agree, we escalate to Dries. And he's the one that decide in the end.
At DrupalCon, I think, more specifically DrupalCon Portland, right? Dries seemed to say that there was some sort of like voting criteria where people were kind of voting on or weighting the modules that could potentially come out of core. Can you talk about that process a little bit?
Yes, yeah. So there's been, it was just within the core committer team, right? It's not open to the whole world because essentially it requires input from the core committers who did the job on the module. So there's been 2, 3, 4, 5. The 12 people that's kind of contributed to the spreadsheet where we say, okay, is this module giving one of the fundamental foundational capability that Dries talked about, like the 4 thing, the content modeling, and the 3 others, again, just content modeling and content delivery, content authoring, and systems operation. So those are the 4 kind of things Drupal should be doing. And then deciding what goes into each of those topics is, still up for debate, but at least it's kind of a guideline. So we say, is this module, do we feel that this module belongs to one of the 4 topics? Yes, no. Then we have, is this module easy to maintain? Or is it a pain to maintain? Like for example, if you take the ban module, is it really, something that should be in core? But at the same time, it's really easy to maintain. So, it doesn't really cost much to keep it in core. And then we have the kind of usage of the module. So is this module used on a lot of sites that we know of, or if they're not? So this data about the usage is kind of biased because it's only for sites that enable the update module. Because we look at the data that comes from Drupal.org. And I think it was like, if you have a module that is enabled on the standard profile, it gets different rules as to what is considered like a high usage compared to a module that is not enabled in the standard profile.
That makes sense. I think.
So yeah, those 3 things get kind of put on into one single score, I guess. And I think Dries talked about the thresholds. And in the end, if you have if you're higher than 2, you're safe. I mean, the module is safe and it's, it kind of belongs into core. And if it's under, it could be considered like non-essential, I guess, or like not worth to keep in core with all the gates and all the process around maintaining a module.
Okay.
And it could benefit from being in Contrib.
So I'm curious about some specifics then, because certain modules being in core or in Contrib has been a discussion that's been, long-term listeners will know that this is something that I have some opinions on, and I'm curious. I guess on two levels. I'm curious what your opinion is on some of these specific modules, but before I get into the specific modules, what modules are in discussion for being removed? I mean, obviously, color and aggregator are deprecated right now, which means they're pretty much on their way out. I think poll was removed from 7 to 8, if I recall correctly.
Oh, right. Yeah.
But are there other modules that you think are like, hey, these are CKEditor, but are there others that are on the chopping block that you're like, hey, probably in the next version or so, these ones are going out?
So I wouldn't say chopping block. So this is kind of an issue I had with the kind of terminology we used around talking about all this. Because, I mean, some module, putting them out of core, kind of say they're not going to thrive in Contrib because the use case is not really relevant anymore. Because nobody uses it anymore. So we get it out of core to reduce the burden, but we know it's not going to get a great life afterward because it's not really a use case anymore. But there are some others that could be improved from being out of core. So I'd like to say like the module graduates from core, kind of. So it's kind of
it's interesting too, because now that you mention it, like sometimes it can be hard to get a patch in core or get a fix in core or get a feature sometimes, and
it's a rebirth, Nick. The module is reborn in Contrib.
So sometimes moving it to Contrib means that it can get more attention as well, or additional maintainers.
So if you talk about like specific modules, like I can't say this one is going to be moved out because I don't know. It's not my kind of decision to make, but I know of few like the statistics module or the history modules where people have proposed improvements for like 9 years in the case of the history module, and nothing made it in because it's just not a priority for the core committers. So those modules could gain from being moved out of core. Even the color module could be improved more easily out of core. And all of those modules like have a very strong foundation now because they've been in core for a long time. So like we have test suites that make sure that the basic use case are not going to break when you make new release and everything. So we know it's kind of safe to move out. Because there's a good test coverage. So as long as the new maintainer is going to be like minimally looking at adding test coverage, that should be fine. But those like we have, I mentioned the ban module as well. Could be kind of looked at to move out of core. Book. I mean, this whole thing
Book was about, Book was one of the ones we were thinking about because we had a show on Book maybe 2 months ago, and it's kind of the discussion around that is interesting because core has some specific, really strict guidelines on things like test coverage, right? Like even if a Contrib maintainer has test coverage, if they have a failing test, there's nothing stopping them from releasing it, right? But the core, the core team is much more strict about that. They've made those commitments that, hey, I'm sure there's some exceptions. In fact, if you're interested in core coverage, test coverage, there's been a lot of discussion in the infrastructure channel about that recently. So it might be a good insight into that. But there's a commitment there, which kind of points to that burden that you were talking about. Like the maintainers have there's a responsibility there to make sure that they're not breaking things for people using it. That's a little bit different than when it's in contrib. That being said, like I said, I do have some opinions here. I have some questions about some modules that I've always been curious about from the core maintainer side. If you know where these kind of fall on that spectrum, if they should be moved to contrib, or if the maintainer is happy to continue maintaining it in core.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is form. I think John mentioned this. If I think I'm going to build a form, I don't know that I'm using the core form module.
Yeah, I mean, would you even use Drupal?
I mean, no, probably not.
Yeah. So yeah, that's your answer. Yeah, it's. I mean, to me, it should be getting out. Is it on the list? Where is it? Yeah, it's like at the bottom of the list of stuff that needs to be moved out. So it's. I think it's going away at some point. And this is one of the modules where we are not. We're pretty sure that it's not going to be. Nobody's going to spend a lot of time improving the form module to make it up to the standard of forums that you have from other softwares. So yeah, it's going to graduate, but kind of retire as well.
Yeah. Well, what about Tor? Because Tor is now the module that I uninstall on every single project that I start. and I understand that it has really if you need it, there's nothing else like it, right? It has really good use cases, but it's also like, why is it in core?
Yeah, so it's one of the things that you have the 4 kind of foundational capabilities, but you have also like the strategic value thing. So it's kind of a core committer, superpower that say, okay, even if it's not in the use case, even if it's not used a lot, we still want to keep it because it's important for Drupal and Drupal's future. Either because the technology might pick up later and we need to be ready and have it in core already, or because, as in the case of Tor, it provides a feature that's really important to have, even if it's not used a lot. Because when you need it, you really need it.
Yeah, makes sense. We already talked, there's a few statistics-based ones like history, statistics, tracker. Are those, you talked a little bit about it. Are those set to graduate as well at some point, or are they just going to be maintained more actively?
So, I mean, to me, they should graduate because, I mean, so with the list and the scoring, like they are below the score of 2 that Dries talked about.
Yeah.
So they are not strategic. Either they are hard to maintain, or they don't fit the 4 foundational capabilities of Drupal.
Okay. Yeah, I think that makes sense. I uninstall most of them too. I mean, I find that if you don't plan for them, they become real performance problems. And I think I've only ever needed them on one site. Just 2 more, because I don't want to belabor each and every core module, but I have 2 more that I noticed today looking through the list. I didn't even know basic auth was a thing in Drupal core.
Yeah. Well, this one is
that?
I think it's it's for your JSON API and all the API headless stuff, because you want to have authenticated requests.
I have used it.
Don't want to have like OAuth or something.
Yep. Nope, I have used it. Now that you said that, okay, that makes sense. And then the last one, and I'm just going to ask this one again a little bit more specifically because we had a show on it so recently. But what are your thoughts on the book module? Is that something? Because again, it's one of those things where not too many people need it, but if you need it, it's the only thing out there. It's unique.
Yeah, I love the book module. Actually, I mean, this whole show is because I reached out to you after the book module episode. Where you said, you were like, oh yeah, we don't really know what's getting out of Drupal or why things are getting out. And I wanted to make sure that everyone, knows about the process and what has been happening. So personally, I love the book module, but it's not considered like a strategic capability, or yeah, I guess it's not like it's above the 2 score, but I'm not sure it's going to stay in very long.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, it provides something unique, right? You know, taxonomy exists as a thing because there's hierarchy, right? And then nodes exist because they're content. Book exists because it gives you the ability to have a table of contents and an hierarchy of content. You know, without a convoluted, taxonomy representation.
Actually, it's below 2 the score, so yeah, it's probably going to be on the next batch of module we are looking to remove.
Okay, it's good to know.
I just wanted to say that I appreciate like the paradigm shift from chopping block to like graduation or retirement. It feels so much better. It's like you're gonna be allowed to grow up, little module, or it's time for you to go out to pasture, old friend. Like feels a lot better.
Yeah, and because the code is the code is old, so there's a lot of knowledge attached to that code. So talking about getting rid of it, it's kind of talking about forgetting all of this, and I'm not really happy about this framing. So yeah, I prefer as well, talking about kind of keeping that and just moving it somewhere else that might be a better place. Yeah.
It's probably a nicer use of terms when talking about somebody's hard work, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
and it truly
work,
and it truly is what you're saying. Like some things just because of the commitments of course, some things really are hard to implement, and Contrib really is just a better space for them. Contrib can innovate in certain ways. I mean, Drupal core innovates in a lot of ways, but Contrib can innovate in different ways sometimes, and can certainly iterate a lot faster.
Actually, I wanted to. I wanted to go back to that. The fact that core, the innovation, because Dries talked about a lot of how to innovate faster. And in his last keynote, he said, we're not going to lower the bar for the quality. So we need to have different ways of improving the velocity or the innovation speed. And this is one of the ways as well. It's if we make the core smaller, it's easier to maintain. And the core committer team, by definition, is a maintainer team. It's not like an innovation team. It's not the people that are driving the initiatives, for example. Like some of them are initiative leads and that kind of things, but we're looking at people outside of the core committer team to kind of manage the innovation, and the core committer team is there to make sure that everything works and is stable, kind of.
So let's dig into that a little bit because I'm curious when a module core module is identified and it's decided that it's going to go into the contrib space. I'm wondering, do you guys first identify a maintainer for that to say like, hey, do you want to like take this on as like a responsibility? Because like, let's just I don't know, let's take Book for example, right? Like Book's going out into the contrib space. That module, right, needs a maintainer, needs somebody to kind of like, facilitate it a little bit. Are you guys identifying people to fill those roles, or are you just kind of like doing it yourself?
So I guess there's a couple of situations. The ideal scenario is going to be someone wants to work on the module and improve it. So that person is going to be, pretty much a maintainer for that module inside the contrib space. But yeah, nothing moves out of core without a maintainer. Right. So there's not going to be like an orphan module that we move out of core and just leave there to
even for something like Forum, where it's like we might not see much like innovation and development here.
Well, but you might need to update for new PHP versions.
Sure.
So,
Or
as long
security
as,
fix.
or security issues. So as long as the module is not kind of outright deprecated,
Right.
it needs someone to maintain it to make sure that, the minimum quality that we have in Drupal around security and that kind of things is ensured.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I there's a little piece of me that hopes that some real passionate forum user is out there and like wants to like, make the Drupal forum module like the best thing it can be and build a whole contrib ecosystem for it.
I have a feeling that's going to be Michelle, right? I mean, and if you don't know her, Michelle, I think maintains the advanced forum module. And I just remember her she was one of the first people to interact with me on IRC. She wasn't the first, but she was one of the first people to interact with me back in the IRC days and help me out. The one website that I use forum on, which is the website that also made me realize Drupal probably isn't the place to host a forum because of the amount of spam that made its way onto that site in a short period of time. But I remember Michelle being very, very involved in any and every single forum issue on Drupal.org.
So finding the maintainer in the contrib space is one of the first tasks. Because we're not going to move something out if there's nobody to maintain it. So sometime a core committer is going to say, okay, that's, it's easier for me to maintain it in contrib than to maintain it inside of core. So they'll be, okay, yeah, I maintain that.
Sure.
If it makes it easier to move out. But yeah.
And I mean, maintainers can always change too, right? Just because somebody takes it when it comes out of core doesn't mean they have to maintain it forever. Like that's by nature not what we do.
So for modules that were removed in the past, like we're talking about learning from our history, that's why we're graduating them or retiring them to keep that around. When they've been removed in the past, how has that impacted the people that are using that module?
So I'm not actually sure because there's not many instances of us doing that. And I don't think there's been any removal with Composer things around. So I guess Drupal 10 will be the first one that removes module when people use Composer. So before we talked about the pool module that got removed, but I don't think it was like a huge user base for that module. But yeah, the CK editor one is going to be interesting because a lot of people have it enabled. And
So last week, I think I talked a little bit about upgrading CK Editor, and for me, it seemed pretty intuitive and pretty straightforward to kind of walk through the process because there was a deprecation warning in Drupal that was like, hey, this module's going to be deprecated. Like you got to do something. And then upgrading to CK Editor 5 was installing the module from the contrib space and then just kind of following the prompts to get it working. I imagine like that's going to be there may be a little bit of like the reverse of that when something goes into contrib, right? You're going to probably have that warning, but is the goal to totally piggybacking off this question, is the goal there to have the contrib module ready before the actual deprecation happens? So like, so you could essentially make the switch before it's actually removed from core, or are those things going to be pretty like it's removed from core and then the contrib space is up and running?
So you don't need the release to have the deprecation, but you do need to have like a stable release in contrib for us to remove it from core. So like, for example, having a stable CK editor module inside of contrib is a blocker for releasing Drupal 10.
Got it.
Because people can't, if you don't want to update to CK editor 5 and you want to keep CK editor 4, you can still use the contrib module like pretty easily. but it needs to be like a stable and maintained release for you to do
Right.
that.
So let's talk about like something like color, right? So like colors being removed. Is there currently like a color contrib module living
I
out there? I
think
mean,
it's
I guess I could
already
look it up,
stable.
but-
I think it's already stable. Yeah, that's already is like September.
Hey, look, there it is. Color
Yeah.
backport.
Because there's no like work on it, and it was already working inside of core, so you just take the code from core and put it in contrib and release it, and that's
Right. So that was going to be my other question, is like talking about like people using it, right? And like their, their pain point, right? If the code that's in core is the same as the code that's in the contrib module, like there's like almost zero friction there, right? In theory.
Yeah, that's the plan. Yeah.
Well,
like the 1.0 released in contrib should be the same as what you had in core.
Well, I'm curious too about things like issues. Like, we were talking a little bit before the show about some long running issues in core. Core, sometimes there's an issue that's been going on for 3 or 4 years, and part of the idea of moving something into contrib is to start taking care of those. Are issues for a particular subsystem in core moved to the new contrib space so that they can be addressed? Or
we have help from the TA on that, and they just mass move the issues.
Okay. And does that affect issue credits? So do those issue credits no longer become core credits if you were working on that? Or
I think they move, yeah. I mean the new ones. I think the old one stay like that because the issues that are fixed are still in core, right? We move the open issues to the
you
contrib
move only
space.
open issues, which makes sense, I guess. But that's interesting. That's an interesting. Like this talks about this kind of explains why this show is a thing, though, right? Again, it's not as simple as just moving the code over to a different place. Like
No.
there's processes, there's probably merge requests and issue forks and things that will have to be re-rolled.
Oh, right.
And it's going to be a lot more complex to re-roll because it's a completely different code base, right? It's a subset of another code base. So
that's a really good question. I have no idea about merge requests.
Yeah, and what about like if, like you said, the 1.0 is equal to what was in core, but what point in time was that? If there's a security release now, color is still going to get updated in core. Are they just going to fix that independently on the contrib space, or are they just going to, what does it diverge as soon as it's been split to 1.0?
Yeah, for security topics, you have the security team in the loop, and they look at core and contrib. It's the same thing for them. Same. It's the same responsibility. So they're going to warn the module maintainer that there's a security issue on their module, invite them into the security team issue because they have a specific tracker for security issues. And this will get solved that way. So if you have a security issue in the color module, it's going to get fixed on 9.5. If it needs to be fixed in 9.5, and it's going to be fixed on the contrib module at the same time. And the release should be synchronized because,
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And by the way, I have to say that the security team is
very good.
Very good. I mean, they respond so quickly too. Like I've opened a couple security issues in the past, and they respond usually within hours. And I know that Steven has reported issues, and they've been fixed within 12 hours. Like the security release was fixed within 12 hours for the next release. So they're very good. They're very responsive. They take their job very seriously. They're very talented. It's pretty impressive. It's definitely one of the selling points of Drupal as a whole, right? I think.
Yeah. And it's a lot of work. Yeah.
I can imagine the volume that they deal with.
Not everyone is friendly as well. So
yeah, I can imagine. I see the public queue. So So I guess the question is kind of going back to a semi-recurring question that we've had for you. You've mentioned, a lot of these things are moving to core so that they can, they're graduating from core to contrib so that they can be iterated on more. But there are some other modules where it truly is just a straight deprecation. CK Editor is a good example. CK Editor really is kind of strictly being deprecated by CK Editor 5, right? Now there are going to be people using the older version. It's going to be maintained for a certain period of time. What is that period of time? Is it just it's going to be maintained until the version of Drupal that it was on is end of life? Is it as long as the maintainer feels like it, or is that not really defined?
So it kind of depends. So if we take the CK Editor example, this one is pretty specific because CK Editor 4 has the end of life. So it's like end of next year, I think. And the issue was that we can't put that into Drupal 10 because our support window is longer than 2023. And we can't commit to maintaining CK Editor 5, the library, right? So it needs to get out of core so that it can be, the module can be deprecated when CK Editor 4 is end of life. And that doesn't impact the core support window as well. So this one should be obsolete when CK Editor 4 is end of life. Or maybe if like the CK Editor team wants to sell support, they can probably do that as well because it's the folks that make the CK Editor 5 stuff as well. But for other modules, it's kind of up to the maintainer, right? And maybe it's not even up to the maintainer, right? It's even up to the community because if the maintainer doesn't want to maintain the module, someone else can just claim it at some point. There's a whole process on Drupal.org to retrieve access to a module that is abandoned.
So when I wrote this question, admittedly, it was less about something like CK Editor, which is like very clear in kind of like its need for deprecation, right? And more in the vein of like, color or forum, right? Where those modules are kind of like, and I keep going back to the forum module and I'm not picking on it. I'm just using it as an example. Don't send me nasty grams because you love forums. I have a fond place in my heart for forums too. But I guess like in that case, right? Like, I guess it just kind of lives on for as long as it lives on, as long as somebody's willing to maintain it and kind of like keep it going, right? It's not, there's never like we'll see, like it'll last, it'll be there for a year and then maybe we'll just like, we'll just discontinue it or deprecate it or, get rid of it. So.
Yeah. And I think that makes sense. What else can you do, right? But it also highlights something that you said too. It's kind of like the Drupal 8 to Drupal 9 upgrade. The reason why Drupal 9 came out was because Symfony was no longer going to be maintained. Symfony 3, I think it was, was end of life. And Drupal as a community, one of the reasons why we moved to Symfony is so that we didn't have to maintain that infrastructure, that we could pool our resources with the Symfony Foundation and all the other, projects that use it, like, Laravel and Silverstripe and et cetera. That was the whole point of it. But it sounds like moving things from core to contrib can help with that problem I guess it's not a problem, help with that on a smaller scale as well, right? The Drupal community doesn't want to take on maintaining CK Editor, like you said, beyond its end of life, which they could do. If there are huge, if there was unlimited resources, that's something that you could do, right? You could say, okay, we'll just take on maintaining that for the extra 2 years that we need to, rather than removing it. But it sounds like moving it to contrib strikes that balance of allowing the people that need that, they can expend those resources there, but it's not burning out the core maintainers trying to maintain something that's, a large portion of the internet community at large has moved on from because it's end of life. Because that's that's part of the process too. Like you said, there's not a huge number of core maintainers. There's not a huge number of core committers, right? Your resources are finite as well. So we want to make sure that you're using them in the best way possible and having the most impact.
Yeah, that's a balance to find, and it's trial and error, right? So we're going to try something with getting modules out of core, and maybe it's going to work, maybe it's not going to work, but at least it's something different than what we used to do. So
I'll just be happy that there's less modules to uninstall when I set up a new site.
Well, if you have like the whole recipe initiative.
Yeah. Oh, I'm excited about that.
Yeah, you're going to like that, so you don't have to.
There may be more modules to install.
Yep.
Yeah, but the one you choose.
Exactly. New and exciting modules. So I think we talked about this at the top of the show a little bit, but I kind of want to come back to why this process is important for Drupal core, right? We talked about, obviously, the show title, a smaller core. Everybody can kind of get behind fundamentally why like a smaller core is a possibly happier or better core, right? But I'm just wondering if you can highlight like some of the key points into, why going through this process is helpful. I think one of them that you mentioned, which is interesting, is innovation, right? Being able to innovate and improve some of the really core, not to overuse the word core, but really like fundamental parts of Drupal, right? That may not necessarily get as much love as they should, or as much innovation as they should. Are there any other really like important reasons why this process exists?
So there's a few considerations, right? So you have kind of trying to define what Drupal core is supposed to be. Mm-hmm. So that's a very old bike shed. Like, what should Drupal be? What is Drupal? It's a fundamental question that the product owner should kind of try to solve or respond to in some cases. I think the best we have is Dries' vision. So the Drupal is for ambitious site builders. So we want to kind of focus Drupal in a direction, and some of the stuff that we have today in core doesn't fit that direction, right? So it's time and energy spent on things that are not, well, they're important, but not to the vision that we have today. So they might have been important in the past, and that's why it's in core. But today they are not as relevant. So we just want to keep working on the stuff that is relevant for the direction that we have today, and want to focus the efforts on those things. And that's why if we graduate or retire stuff from core, other people for which those modules are important, they can spend the time to make them great, or much better than what they are today. So there's that. There's reducing the dependencies, because we depend on a lot of external libraries. So you mentioned Symfony, aggregator relied on some very old libraries as well that we had problems with. So we want to get rid of that. That reduce the work for the security team as well. Because if there's less third-party stuff, there's less monitoring to do. It's also kind of makes things faster to install if you don't have as many modules. But makes it's sense. Like kind of focus, vision, the security. That's kind of the main topics for why Drupal with a smaller core is important.
Yeah.
All of those things make complete sense and make me very excited to have a smaller core.
And the thing is that we have a smaller core, but we are going to make it much easier to add stuff to core with Project Browser, right?
Right.
So it's not.
Yeah.
It's going to be easier to add stuff to your Drupal now.
Yeah, even recipes or starter kits,
Yeah.
like all of those things are geared towards like you actually getting the modules into your version of Drupal that you need to do what you're trying to do, right?
I also think that a smaller core itself is kind of a misnomer, just because if you compare, the number of modules in the core
don't do it
8.0 to now. I mean,
okay.
With the experimental module, process, new features are getting put in every 6 months or so, or a couple times a year, right? Yeah, I think inline form errors wasn't, part of core when Drupal 8.0 was released. Migrate wasn't part of core. Media wasn't part of core. So it's not even like core actually isn't getting smaller. Core is still getting bigger, and doing some big things. I think it's about allowing these modules to get the attention that they deserve, right? And for some modules, that attention is core. Like views clearly should be in core.
Right. It's also not saddling somebody with a module they don't necessarily need, right? Like if you don't need form functionality, like there's no reason your code base should kind of be like carrying that around with it, right?
Just in case, yeah.
Just to remind you of the olden days.
So like, and to be fair, your point was very good, Nick. I thought you were going to make a comparison to another well-known and very widely used CMS that I will not name. But yeah, I mean, I think you're right. Like it's, it is definitely a misnomer, but I think also like there are instances where like, hey, we're removing color, we're removing, aggregator, we're removing potentially forum, like those things have like code cruft that come with them that now don't have to kind of be shipped with core. So, I mean, that's kind of where at least in my simple brain, I go, oh, it's getting smaller.
Yeah. Maybe smaller than the day before, but smaller year over year, not smaller year over year.
Well, sure.
It's not a smaller core, it's like a more focused core.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that this, along with the experimental process and the 6-month point release, has been some of the best improvements project management wise for Drupal in years. I mean, it allows, it's part of that innovation cycle that we were talking about earlier, right? The ability to add new stuff over time. Before, it could only be added at a major point release, which is sometimes many years in between. But with the experimental process, it's now like, 6 months can be 6 months.
It's like Battle Axe core versus Scalpel core. We're working towards Scalpel core, where like you're going to get a very focused product, right?
All right, Theodore. All right, so we keep asking you questions. We're all talking about the future right now, right? I'm going to ask you to draw on your 13 years of Drupal experience. Make a prediction here. What modules do you think will be removed next after Drupal 10?
Well, I mean, that's not too hard. So it's going to be, well, I think it's going to be like focus, forum, statistics, history, the one we talked about. Those are not like very hard to book as well.
Oh, really? What about Tracker?
Yeah, it's on the list as well to be removed.
Is that list public, or is that
no? It's
something...
not public.
Isn't Tracker isn't that the module that's used to like track usage statistics for Drupal? Like for modules in your Drupal site?
All three of those modules I think are in similar spaces, like history, Tracker, and statistics, I think.
Yeah, but statistics is like node usage. I don't even know what history does. Sorry, I've used Drupal forever and like But like, yeah, I thought Tracker was what kind of phoned home and told Drupal like people were
No,
using
that-
modules, but I
No,
could be
that's
wrong.
the upgrade.
Update module. Yeah.
Ah, okay. See,
Update, yeah.
use
And
Drupal
actually,
for 12
there's
years.
there's
Learn
an issue
something
open
new.
for Tracker in Drupal 10, so probably not even Drupal 11. Yeah. So yeah, I think the more kind of that's going to be my own opinion, not the opinion of the
Oh, yeah.
core team, right?
Absolutely.
I think the one that should probably graduate, maybe migrate. Migrate started in Contrib.
I saw something about that recently.
It's not to say it's not important, but it's like, we wanted to have migrate to make sure that Drupal 8, Drupal was
Drupal 7 to Drupal 8 and Drupal 9 was covered, right?
Yeah, right.
Mhm.
But
Hey, that's actually
do we
a really
actually use migrate for that?
that's a
like-
really interesting idea.
I do. I use
And
migrate for all
yeah,
sorts
but-
of things.
But core itself doesn't use migrate to do the update, right?
Right.
It's a tool we provide
I don't believe
to.
so. Yeah. So to clarify that for our listeners, so I think Migrate got moved into core so that it would support a migration pathway natively from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8 or Drupal 9. So once Drupal 7, I think the plan was once Drupal 7 was end of life and fully removed, Migrate after that could be removed, because Drupal itself, if you're going from 8 to 9 or 9 to 10, doesn't use the Migrate module.
Yeah.
For example, 8 to 9.
You don't need the migrate. You don't need to migrate.
Yeah,
You could upgrade.
8 to 9. It was just replacing Symfony and removing deprecated code. It wasn't a major change.
Right.
As
So, I
far
mean,
as things go.
Migrate
Sure,
definitely could, in my opinion, my humble opinion, could definitely go back to the contrib space, right? Because after Drupal 8, there's an upgrade path to 9 to 10 to 11 to Xfinity and beyond.
Yeah. I think if you're trying to go
and-
from 7 to 11, you have like a whole other set of
Well,
concerns.
but there's a whole
Right.
problem there, right? And you need
Mhm.
you need migrate at that point, like, and at that point you can pull it in, from
But
contrib for your project.
but you're not using, at that point you're just migrating from a source to a destination. You're not I think the point of it being in core really was you could say this is a Drupal 7 site I'm migrating from, and it would do a lot of that auto discovery.
I mean,
for
we
you.
all got that. I think we're all in agreement with that, but like going forward, it's not necessary. And I think
exactly.
I think it really does make sense to move to contrib, because like, thinking of sites that I've built, like right over the last, like Drupal 9 sites that I've built, like there are uses for migrate that aren't just like migrating content, right? So like in the past, I've used migrate as like a feeds substitute to do like more advanced feeding from other systems, right? So like there's still a use case there, but like ultimately I don't know that it's necessary on a wide range of Drupal 9 sites, right? So yeah, I could definitely see see that one coming out at some point.
I've used it also for like re-architecting it. Like if you change a content type structure and you can use it to migrate content from one content type to another.
The other thing there though is it's not something that you would use necessarily on a production site, right? So like that's the other aspect there, that if it's in core, like it has to ship out to production, like again, increasing your file footprint, if you will. If you have it in a contrib space, you have the ability to add it as a dev dependency and then bring it in as a dev dependency and then remove it from production or staging if you need to. So that's actually super interesting.
Yeah, and maybe the contact module as well.
Oh, contact. Yeah, I've never used that, but I know John's.
Whoa. Let's slow down a second here. Slow down, because I will fight on that one, because
I've never used it.
For a while, I would actually use core contact in place of web forms, because web forms was just so felt like such overkill for like building just a simple web form. Sharon's giving me looks right now. I think she might think I'm insane. I don't know. But like literally I was like, you could just like literally turn on the contact module and like, hey, there's a contact form and like here are a couple of things you can do with it. Cool, works out of the box. You go sometimes I install web forms and gosh, I literally love Jacob Rockowitz. He's like the best human being. Not like I recommend using web forms if you need complex forms, but like in the early stages of like web form, I would turn that thing on and like it would just overwhelm me. And like I'd be like, nope, I'm just gonna go to Core Contact because it's easy. So I think for people who are like looking for that kind of like off the shelf, like I'm gonna grab Drupal and build a website with it, like Core Contact Forms is important.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just went on a tangent there.
No, you're fine. My look was because I found your passion. Oh, I was gonna say my look was because I found your passion for the topic very endearing, and I was like, oh, he really cares about this.
It highlights the need for this discussion, though, right? You know, it's not as simple as, hey, I've never used Contact, John does, or like Migrate. Like there's people that use Migrate on every single project in production. There's people that use Tracker on their site, and it's critical to them. But you know, from the maintainer side, there also needs to be, you know, there needs to be a balance. So,
well, hold on a second. Sorry, I just like a lightning bolt. This hit me, and this is actually a question that. So we earlier in the show we talked about like how the like selection process kind of goes for like for sunsetting these modules, right? I'm wondering, is there any sort of, because obviously this is like a core maintainer, you know, Dries conversation, right? But is there any public forum to get like public insight on some of these as far as like, hey, like what does the public think of us taking these modules out of core?
I think that happens in the issue queue. So there's going to be an issue that say remove X, Y from core, and then people are going to say, okay, yes, no. There's going to be some discussion there, but in the end, it's the core maintainer responsibility because they're the one that actually do the job of maintaining it. So if they are not willing to maintain it anymore, there's not much you can do. And if you're interested,
it's going to be a high bar. Yeah. It's going to be a high bar. It's hard to become a core maintainer, and it needs to be a maintainer. So basically, if you want to stay in core, you have to become that maintainer, and you have to have a track record. Like there's criteria to be a core maintainer. It's not like, you know, I imagine that's if something gets proposed to be removed, it's pretty likely that it's going to be removed.
There's been discussion before. It's not like someone just thinking, oh, maybe we could get rid of that.
yeah, exactly. And like we've been saying, it's not like, hey, removed, it's deleted, it's gone forever. No, it just moves to contrib. So if it really is that important to you, you can still maintain it. And you'll probably have an easier time contributing to a contributed module than to a core module as well.
Nick, I'm not going out to install contact form module. I'm not doing it. It's going to stay in core. I'm making t-shirts. I'm making t-shirts.
You can Drupal.
Hashtag save the contact module. I need y'all to clue me in here because I'm a little bit outsider. What kind of commitment does it take to be a core system maintainer? Nick. Theodore.
I guess a core maintainer, you don't have commit rights. So you're basically managing the issue queue. Writing patch, making review. So, I mean, that's the whole definition list of roles in the Drupal community. And the core maintainer for specific topics is that you're kind of in charge of this topic. Like for JavaScript, for example. Oh, sorry, it got dark. But for JavaScript, it's like I make sure that I look at all the JavaScript stuff, try to plan for updates or that kind of things, but I don't have the right to commit anything to core. And when you are a core committer, then you have the kind of access to commit things to the Git repository.
Okay.
And when you're a core committer, historically, you kind of scale down on your patch work. So it's more review-based role, I guess.
Yeah.
Making sure that everything, pass the various gates for the quality that we have. But it takes a lot of time and patience.
Yeah.
But that's
It
the
sounds
main
like
thing.
it. So you have the ability to manage. Your responsibility is to maintain the issue queue. I imagine help feed some of that information to the core committers. So you don't have commit rights, but I imagine you can more easily get the ear of a core committer if there's a critical patch or something.
Yeah, for the maintainer role, yeah. For the JavaScript stuff, it's a separate repository. So I do have commit rights to this
really?
other repository, but not the Drupal
Okay.
repository.
Interesting.
So yeah, but yeah, it's there's a specific area where core committers discuss the various topics that they are responsible for, and
Okay.
I do have access to that, and that's where discussion around which module is strategic to Drupal, which one belongs to the fundamental capabilities, that kind of thing is happening.
Okay, I have one final question for you before we close out the show, as we're coming up on time. So feel free to be brief here. But as we've been talking through this, I've been curious. Do you think that there's going to be a new like right now we have an experimental module process? Like you can, if you have a module you want to get into core, you can make it. If you do certain things, you can make it experimental, and then if you get a stable release after 2, I think, consecutive point releases, then it can become part of core. Do you think that there's going to become a way to remove modules at a point release like that in the future? Like rather than, because right now it looks like you're doing it as, when Drupal 10 comes out, these ones are removed. When Drupal 11 comes out, these ones are removed. Do you think that will also become hey, 10.2, this is going to be deprecated, and 10.4 is going to be removed? Or is it always going to be a major point release where it gets removed?
So yeah, it's not going to be possible to do that in a minor because of semantic versioning. Because all the modules are part of the public API. So if you change the public API, if you remove things from your public API, you need to increase the major version for your application, right? So you can add stuff in minor, but you can't remove stuff in minor, which is why you have all the BC layer that stays until the next major release, which is why it's good to have like regular major release to get rid of all the BC layers that we accumulated.
Yep. Makes perfect sense. Well, thank you for joining us. This has been really enlightening. I'm glad you reached out after the book module to provide some insider knowledge there. Yeah. So definitely appreciate that.
Do you have questions or feedback? Reach out to Talking Drupal on Twitter with the handle Talking Drupal, or by email with show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our hosts and other listeners on Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel.
You can also promote your Drupal community event on Talking Drupal. Learn more about this at talkingdrupal.com/tdpromo. Get the Talking Drupal newsletter for show news, upcoming Drupal camps, local meetups, and more. Sign up for the newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter. And thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choosing the Become a Patron button. Well, as I mentioned, it's been a pleasure having you on. Theodore, if our listeners wanted to get in touch with you, had some questions, what would be the best way for them to do that?
I think the Slack, Drupal Slack channel in there, or the contact form on Drupal.org.
And what's your username there?
It's node_. The underscore is silent.
And Taryn, if our listeners want to get in touch with you.
Yep, on Drupal.org and on the Drupal Slack, I'm 9lives Black Cat. And on LinkedIn and Twitter, I'm TEARYNEG.
And John, how about you?
You can find me on all the major social networks and Drupal.org at John Picozzi. And you can find out about EPAM at EPAM.com.
And you can find me pretty much everywhere at Nixman, NSCXVAN.
And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking. Have a good one, everyone.
See you guys next week.
Thanks. Bye.